Arteta! What a strike! What a screamer! Zola! What a fantastic goal! Arsenal back in it! And here's Limpar, lines it up, finds the net. Arsenal in front.
That sound you hear is me furiously deleting any tweet I ever wrote that had a bad word to say about Whatta Kolasinac. This is the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. My name is Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Look, football aside, what a man. What a man. As a famous band once said, what a man, what a man, what a man, what a mighty good man. I don't want to do a deep dive on this, and maybe down the road later on the pod, we will get into it with Clive and Paul, but obviously the news regarding Ozil and Kolasinac being attacked by knife-wielding thugs is disturbing, to say the least, and I'm glad that they're both well, and it is quite impressive to see a man that would put his life on the line to defend himself and his friend. And so, in general, just kudos to him. And certainly a very scary situation. Happy they're both doing well. This is what you might call a bumper pod. So, first of all, we're recording it in the morning, hence my slightly froggy throat, and what will inevitably be a less than ordinarily creative effort from me. But that's okay, because I'll be joined by people who are meant to be the stars of this. One of them is Tim. He'll be on momentarily. Clive and Paul will be on down the line. So the way we're going to do this is Tim's going to handle the Q&A, which he attended. We'll get a sense of what it was like to be there, the questions that were asked, answers that were given, anything that he derived from being there in person that maybe is harder to get contextually from a written account of it. And then after the break, we'll come back with Clive and Paul. We'll talk the Madrid game. We'll talk the arrival of Saliba and Ceballos and some other rumors, and maybe a little on the Ozil Kolasinac situation, hopefully in a tasteful manner. But I do think it's news, so it warrants a mention. And Tim, as I mentioned, is here. You can find him on Twitter at Stillberto. Hello, Tim.
Hello there.
Hello, indeed. All right, so you attended the Q&A yesterday. So the first question I have, just the formality of this. This is something that had happened for many years. The Associates General meeting, I guess it was called, for shareholders in the club to meet with the executives and ask them questions and things like that. I'm sort of curious, now that there are no shareholders other than Stan the Man, why this takes place, what the justification for it taking place is. Like, what's the mandate for this, and is it different from what it used to be?
So it's a supporters club Q&A. So it's happened for just over a decade now.
Okay.
It used to be.
So can I stop you for a second? I have already then mistaken exactly what I'm talking about, correct? So the AGM was something totally different from what this is.
Yeah.
Thanks
the AGM had to take place by law. This is something that the club do that they don't have to, in fairness to them, and I'm not sure a lot of other clubs do this, but they do, and they kind of front up every year. It used to be the Arsenal Supporters Trust and the Arsenal Independent Supporters Association, ASA, and that was it. They've since broadened it out to include other supporters clubs, other supporters branches, and things like that. And usually it actually started with Arsene Wenger, but then Arsene Wenger did it once and he never did it again because it got a bit tasty. And then so usually it was Ivan fronted, and over the years it's become slightly more polished. So now they usually have like a special guest. So last year that guest was Unai Emery. The year before they've had like Ian Wright, and Ray Parlour and people like that, and that's kind of nice, but it's also a little bit to soften the crowd and to stage manage things, and also to take up a little bit more time. And you get to ask those individuals questions, and with all due respect, it's great to be able to ask someone like Ian Wright, for example, in past years questions, but you're not asking the top brass about the way that they're running the club. So there's ways they've started to manage it just to take the sting out a little bit. And actually, as much as it's a good thing to broaden it out to other supporters clubs, what that kind of does, and I think Arsenal know this, is it means that some of the questions aren't quite as organised. So when this was just a couple of like leading supporters associations, I've been a member of the AST for some years now. There'd always be a meeting before, and right, what are we going to ask? Well, okay, here's our questions, and you get people who are going to ask the questions so that you can get the maximum out of the event. Now, obviously, now it's a broader church in terms of supporters clubs. You lose that sense of organisation. So there are things that they do to stage manage it, and they have a compare, and so they start off It's Nigel Mitchell, who'll be familiar to most people who either go to the stadium or see anything on Arsenal media. He's kind of tends to be the front man for this kind of thing, and he compares it and he asks some questions for the first half an hour, and then they throw it open to the floor, and it's entirely unvetted, in fairness. So they really do kind of face the music. It's I had a bit of a whinge about this on Twitter. It's slightly regrettable that some people use that opportunity to just execute 3-minute monologues into the microphone and not actually ask a question. Which can be a bit frustrating and waste the small time you have. But where this one was very interesting is they had Edu as the special guest. Now, obviously, he's only just arrived, but that means that effectively the guys running the football side of Arsenal were all there on stage. And they brought Joe Montemurro on a bit later, and they brought Liam Brady on a bit later after that. So actually, to be fair, this one was possibly... It was either stage managed not in the way that they wanted or slightly differently, in that they did have, the 3 guys on stage at the same time, kind of answering the questions. So, maybe that explains a bit why they weren't able to quite take the sting out of this one. I think announcing 2 new signings on the day of this Q&A, I don't think that was a coincidence. I think Saliba certainly could have been announced earlier in the week. I think probably Ceballos could have been announced 24 hours earlier, but they held it back. And I think they held it back for this. And what you see as well is you see some positioning before this, which is entirely understandable and what any organisation would do. But, Arsenal will put stories out. Obviously, they did the interview with Edu last weekend. A lot of that was about positioning for this. And it's good positioning because it anticipates some questions and answers them. But a lot of it as well, if you saw the interview with Raul and Vinai at the end of last season that went on the official website, a lot of it was just to kind of repeat some of that information about the football structure of the club. So it's one of those things. They don't have to do it. And it's good that they do it, but they also, they make sure that it's quite well stage managed, which I guess you'd expect.
Just in terms of first impressions, having been at these meetings handled by the previous regime, what was the sense you got of Raul and Vinai, and to some extent Edu, who it's sort of unfair to put him in this situation having just arrived? And I thought it was interesting that Raul expressly said he's not responsible for this window. His responsibilities start in September, which certainly raises the question, who is responsible for this window and where can I send them my thoughts? But to be fair, this could still turn out to be a fine window. But anyway, in terms of just your first impressions of their level of appreciation of what's going on at the club, the needs and worries of the fans, their ability to sort of handle the environment, appear engaged and interested in all of these things are, to some extent, obviously performative. But did you get a sense of them being better than the previous regime, as good, less credible, more credible? Where do they measure up?
It's difficult because we've from the Gazidis years, we've all got such a layer of like rhinoceros type skin around us about this.
Any slick talking, yeah.
And actually, to be fair, Vinai, who I think comes across, Vinai he's quite young. I think he's about my age. Actually, I think he's only in his mid-30s, like real high achiever. And look, you expect highly paid executives to be able to handle a crowd and handle a microphone quite well, and obviously they can do that. Gazidis could do that. And Vinai actually, he summed it up. He said, "I know you're all sick of hearing words, but this is a Q&A." And unfortunately, that's all we can give you tonight. So, I mean, Vinai, he's the bean counter, isn't he? So, yes, he speaks very impressively, etc., but he's kind of looking after the things that maybe that are important, that don't really get our blood pumping. Raul did a lot of the talking, and I think that was the interesting part. This is quite an out of order thing to say, but once you actually get past the fact that Raul really sounds like a Bond villain, and listen to what he says, like I'm cautiously, with that kind of thick skin of cynicism, I'm cautiously optimistic about Raul. He does come across like as you'd expect from someone who's been at Barcelona and with Nike and things like that. He does kind of talk like he knows what he's talking about. And you know, he obviously does because of the jobs he's done and the job he's doing now. And he, you know, he spoke quite well about like the challenges in the transfer window and things like that. I think they were quite open. I think that's one thing that I would say. So they said a lot of the things.
Were there some veiled
Gazidis.
shots at Gazidis? I was just about to say. I mean, there was the catalyst for change comment was thrown in there. Were there some shots fired?
I think a little bit. Yeah, I think a little bit.
Is that playing to the crowd? Did you get the sense that was meant to sort of be like, look, those guys were fuck ups, but we're going to fix it?
I don't think that that's what they intended. I think that's probably just the reality, and they were maybe trying to dance around it a little bit. What I'd say is that it sounded, I think the thing is everyone's so aware of what the situation is that it was a lot less pie in the sky. There was none of this kind of we can compete with Bayern Munich and you should be excited. Like for the first time at one of these things, Vinai said, like, look, we're not going to win the Premier League this year, which is obviously not a surprise to anybody. And everyone knows that, but at the same time, it was, and he was talking about, look, I want you to know that getting into the Champions League is not our end goal. It's just the first step to get towards our end goal. And but no, I found Raul quite interesting. He's obviously that comment he made about Edu, like that was completely unprompted. He just said, look, I want to set this out now, that this is the case. So he's taking, a fair bit on his shoulders, and he was asked again like a fairly direct question about whether we're going to get another centre back in, and obviously he has to talk around that a little bit, but he said, look, I'm not going to lie to you, I don't know, basically. So he was like, look, we're working, it's a really difficult window, you can see that with the lack of activity everywhere, but he's like, look, I'm not going to promise you that we're going to pull a centre half out of somewhere. We're going to try, but I can't promise you anything. And again, that I think there's, maybe it's just the reality of the situation, but there's slightly less, to use that phrase again, pissing on people's backs and telling them it's raining. There is a little bit of. I've been
told on Twitter that that's an Americanism that came from an American movie of some kind. Yeah, we had a response on Twitter suggesting that. So.
Okay.
Not that I'm trying to claim it if it's not, but I was not aware of it, but apparently it's from a film or a TV show of American origin. And if that's incorrect, somebody get back at us, and then we can get back at him, and then we can start this recursive loop of blaming people for incorrect information. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to say with Edu as well. Edu came on and spoke very well as well. Obviously, his English is really good, but I think. He'll have to be back in England for a little while and sharpen it back up again to fully express himself. But I mean, I think maybe at points he might have been taken a little bit aback by the kind of acidity of the crowd at some points. But I mean, I've seen some people say they feel sorry for him about that, and I think he knows that wasn't directed at him. And also, Edu is very seasoned in this type of environment. He was the guy who faced the press when Brazilian squad announcements were made. And let me tell you, that's a really fucking tough crowd. Facing down Brazilian football journalists about the Brazil squad you've selected is one of the toughest crowds in football, and he used to do that on a monthly basis. So he's no stranger to getting a bit of kickback and fielding those questions and everything. The only bit I'd really call bullshit on was when Raul was talking about Edu, and he was saying, we got off the plane when we touched down from America, and I said, I looked at Edu and he had his eyes had all glazed over, and I said, Edu, how are you? And he says, I'm home. I feel like I'm home. And it's come on, yeah, let's not over egg the pudding here. But he did make a very good point, which personally I'm aware of, but I don't think everyone would have been aware of, was that Edu had a very stable job, had a top job that he really wanted, and he could have stayed in it. And he did choose to come to Arsenal. Now, I don't know if that's because the money was better. That might be a factor. He might have just got sick of working with the CBF for 3 years, which would have been quite understandable. But, he has made this move. And they spoke about the first time they made contact with him, which was last November when Brazil played Uruguay at the Emirates. So, that has been going. We all know he wasn't the first choice because they wanted Monchi, but they had made early contacts with him. So, we got some information there that I don't think we'd had before.
And I think it's a little bit of a misunderstanding of what the fans want. Because, look, at the end of the day, it is nice to have legends of the club back, or certainly former players who are around for periods for which we have great nostalgia, right? And that's nice. Yeah. But I don't think I shouldn't say anybody. I think the vast majority of fans are first and foremost concerned with getting the right people in the right positions. And I'm not saying Edu isn't that guy, by the way, but what I'm saying is, whether you look at what happened at Liverpool around the time they were appointing people like Kenny Dalglish, and the second time, and you look at Chelsea now appointing Lampard, and United fumbling around and winding up with Solskjaer, and I don't think we want to be a club that just brings back the greatest hits and tries to make it a nostalgia club. I don't think having Freddie back and having Boldy back and having Edu back is going to appease anybody. We want performance. So while I appreciate him trying to appeal to that sense of club culture and tradition and history, and he felt like he was home, and we're building a home of Arsenal legends. Like, we want to build new Arsenal legends and new memories and new achievements. So I think it's nice to have that connection to the past, but I certainly, and I'll speak for myself here, I certainly don't feel that a connection to the past vis-a-vis the manager, the technical director, the assistant managers, anything like that. I don't think that is something I particularly care about, as long as I feel qualified people are in the position, if that makes sense.
No, and I wrote a little bit about this last week, actually. And
is there anything you haven't written a little bit about? Just out of curiosity.
Not really, no.
Okay, fair.
Because in Arsenal's history, like lots of clubs do this, in Arsenal's history, we've done this quite a bit. Like lots of clubs do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it just depends on the circumstances. So in the 50s, Arsenal kept hiring a load of guys from the great team of the 30s, and it had the opposite effect that they wanted. It intimidated everyone. And, the guys from the 30s were like, oh, this is not the club I remember. And the guys in the team thought, oh, this is intimidating. I've got this club legend above me. And it didn't work. But then in the 80s, when George Graham came, and George Graham did that whole, I'm bringing back Pat Rice, George Armstrong. You're going to wear club tasers.
That could get the players motivated, to be fair. There are some players that might benefit from that.
Maybe that's how he coached the defence. But, and he did the whole club blazers and ties thing. And don't get me wrong, that's not why Arsenal were revitalised. But I think you could make an argument that at that point the club needed that it had lost its identity a little bit, and Graham brought it back. And you could argue, I think, that Arsenal are in a similar position now, where they've kind of lost a little bit of that identity and what makes them special. And Raul talked about this a lot as well. He said, look, we've got history here, and he said, this is, he's like, this, I'm not saying that this is what I'm happy about and this is everything I want, but he's like, we've got photos on the wall, we've got trophies, we've got legends and everything like that. And he said, but we need to use that as a positive. And without mentioning names, he said, there are some big teams out there at the moment spending lots of money, winning lots of trophies, but they don't have any of that. And he said, let me tell you, because I speak to them, they would kill to have that. And he was talking about using that as strength and not weakness. So I think, it's an intangible, right? It's a bit like saying, mental strength on the football pitch. You can never actually tell how important it is. And it can only ever be 1 or 2% at the most. But I think there is an argument that maybe at certain times those interventions are helpful. But you're right, competence is the absolute, bottom line.
Yeah, look, if Frank Lampard never played for Chelsea, he wouldn't be Chelsea manager. If Solskjaer hadn't played for United, he wouldn't be United manager, so on and so forth. I will say this. Anyone who's ever worked in a company knows that company culture does matter. A toxic culture leads to toxic results, and the opposite is true as well. And so if by bringing these people back who can speak to the history of the club and how big the club felt and everything it achieved and make people feel like they're a part of a really special organization and maybe just turn the tide from feeling like you're at a second-rate club that's in the Europa League to feeling like you're somewhere that really matters and is really special and has a big history and can return to that, maybe that turns some things around. Does that help you beat Liverpool at Anfield? Probably not. But does it help, maybe create the camaraderie and the spirit that you don't lay down and lose the lead to Brighton at home late in the season? Maybe it does. I don't know. That is a very hard thing to evaluate. Yeah, go ahead.
And one of the things Edu talked about as well, actually, and this was one of the lines he clearly wanted to get out, was he was saying, look, yeah, my job is about the medium term, the long term. Yes, it's about scouting. It's about the academy, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a minute because they talked about that a lot.
I do want to hear about that, yes.
But he said, like, and, you know, I know, he said, he was kind of saying, I know you're all looking at me thinking, this is the guy that's going to make signings. But he made, I think, a good point that needs making was actually the most important people we have at the club are the players we have now. Because, like, signings are about the future, and that's great. But a big part of my job is looking at the guys we already have and helping to make them better, helping them, you know, to make them feel important, because they are the most important people at the club, whether you like them or rate them or not. They are our most important asset. And I think that was quite interesting, because I think everyone knows that the technical director role is quite long and medium term, but he was talking about, look, I am here for the now as well, and I am here for the players we already have.
See, that's interesting to me, because I think Emery could use an angel on his shoulder. I think maybe tactically there are things I don't love about him. There are things he absolutely gets right in some of the big games and maybe doesn't get as right in the small games. We could debate that till we're blue in the face, and will all season long, I am sure. But I'm not sure how he is as a man manager. I'm not sure how he is in terms of really putting players in the best situation to succeed in terms of all the players. There's certainly some players who thrived under him, ironically Ramsey being one of them. But I think it would be interesting having that angel on his shoulder where Edu can give Emery a nudge in a direction with a certain player and just kind of help manage him through certain challenges with a player like a Mesut Ozil, for example, with the rotation of the strikers, maybe with utilizing some of those young academy players better. And while technical director, for me, first and foremost, has to be looking down the road at the future, building the squad of the future, I think Emery could use that help, and I'm happy for it. I think we should move on to some of the takeaways you got in terms of the actual questions that were answered. We'll save for the end the tone of the Q&A, because I just want to get your feeling about the general tone and how it impacted the panel on the dais, and also just in general your feeling about how people handled this moment to interact with the club. But let's save that for the end. And before we get to that, certain takeaways. You mentioned the academy. So what are some of the comments he made about the academy that stuck out to you? Because he clearly emphasized it in that video interview that came out a few months ago.
Yeah, so obviously they will always go into these things with some lines that they want to get out and that they want to weave into as many answers as possible. And the academy was one of the recurring themes, even when I don't think they were asked a single question about the academy per se, but they mentioned it a lot. So the very first almost icebreaker question was about the US tour. Raul started talking immediately about the young players and saying, this is what we want, but we need to protect them as well. But, they're all integrating into the group really well. We've made some appointments with exactly this in mind. They talked about Freddie Ljungberg. They talked about Edu's role in terms of overseeing the academy, knowing what's there, and basically knowing what's there and telling Emery what's there. And I think what's interesting, you've heard from some of the younger players that Emery, and I think this is by design, really doesn't even really talk to them. I'm not sure he really talks to anyone. So I think you're right in that comment you made about Edu, kind of. He's suggesting that he's going to have a hands-on player relationship, almost player liaison type role. And you heard some of the young players this summer saying, it's not really Unai that talks to us, it's Freddie Ljungberg. And so it's almost like we've got these intermediaries. And I think the academy is certainly, they were certainly positioning the academy and talking about that and talking about integrating those players better, both on a personal and a coaching level. And Raul did also talk about, selling play. He didn't go into that much, but he did say, as well about it creates a bit of a market for us. And this, again, this is all stuff we've probably worked out for ourselves, but they really, the two big things I think they really wanted to get out were about the academy. And again, this is positioning, because they're basically saying, we're going to be using a lot of these guys probably by necessity. And the other big thing they wanted to get out was that they've made loads of changes and it's going to take a little while to settle down, and that we're not going to see instant results. And they were kind of saying even next season, we've had last season, which was a bit up and down, and they were kind of saying, this season's not going to be perfect either. It's going to take a little while for this all to settle down, but, kind of pleading for patience. I think those are the two big things that they wanted to get out.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. I mean, I guess then we should move on to some of the questions that were asked by the supporters. And before we get onto the tone of them, were there any questions that you felt caught the panel off guard or maybe produced a more honest answer than you might have expected? Was there anything that was teased out that you think might have otherwise slipped through the cracks?
So I think the centre half question maybe caught them a little bit off guard. Like, I think Raul was fairly open about that. There was also there was a question about the club's short-termism over the last few years, but that I think they kind of spoke around that a little bit. The interesting ones, I think, were, so there was a really long rambling question, but eventually when this guy had been talking for about 2.5 minutes, this woman
by the way,
just yelled out.
I'm just going to stop you for a second. If that guy is a listener, we love you and we appreciate you, and by no means do Tim's comments reflect the feelings of the panel as a whole. Go ahead, sorry.
So after about 2.5 minutes, this woman at the back just shouted, "What's your question?" and he just said, "Where's all the money?" Asking about the £45 million budget, and Vinai said very directly, "I don't recognise this figure. That doesn't come from us. I read about this figure all the time. I don't recognise it. Just like I read loads of things that don't bear any truth." So that was quite interesting. He seemed to be refuting that, but obviously, actually I think the figure's 45 million that's been out there. Now, listen, the club know that people like Swiss Ramble and the AST analysis of the accounts are very, very good. They know it. They admit it. They've admitted it publicly many times. But and so when Vinai said, "I don't recognise this figure," it could be because it's 46 million.
Yeah.
He could justifiably say, "No, that figure's completely wrong. It's $1 million out." But he was still fairly, and I think possibly maybe what he was getting into was look, even if that is what we've got to spend, in terms of liquid cash, that doesn't mean that that's the absolute limit of what we can spend, because it's a bit like going into your overdraft. If you're prepared to go into a bit of debt, you can spend more. So I don't know if there was some of that. So I think that one was quite interesting. The other interesting one, again, because it was a direct question, was about safe standing. And actually, Vinai didn't bat this away as much as Gazidis used to. So, he said all the things that, again, we already know, that the stadium wasn't built with it in mind because nobody thought it was going to happen in 2006. But he said, look, we're looking at it, but we've got to look at, he said effectively they're doing a bit of a feasibility study about how many seats they'd have to lose, how it would impact on capacity, etc., etc. So he said his words were, we're behind it in principle, but until we've done the feasibility study, we can't absolutely say we're going to do it. And obviously, the government has to change legislation for it to happen. So again, not hugely revealing, but a bit more positive on that than the previous executives ever were.
Interesting. And so, I mean, in general, unless there's another question you specifically want to get to, I guess we should touch on this. And I want to be a little bit delicate because it is very easy to criticize other people's emotional reactions to certain situations while, not necessarily holding yourself up to the same standards. And a great example of that might be, I know there are a lot of people that have been, on social media expressing displeasure with sort of the rude tone of some of the people in the room. But, ironically, I've seen that from some people who are on this side of the pond, for example, Americans. I'm not calling out Americans. I'm just saying it because of what I'm about to say, which is the same people who were giving the middle finger to Stan and Josh Kroenke in the stadium, were booing Mustafi as he warmed up as a sub. And whether you think those things are justified or maybe you think they're unrelated, it's the point that general decorum is something that is easy to evaluate from afar, but sometimes is different when you're up close. So in terms of decorum, I mean, do you feel that there was a general lack of respectful decorum in the way some of the questions were answered and the way some people shouted down the panel at various times?
I mean, a little bit, yeah. I completely take your point, and having had like a bit of a moan about it. I suppose it's just like a bit of a frustration, more not so much about the tone, because I get it. Like I get people getting annoyed and things like that. It's more about like people just like not asking questions, just like taking the microphone and talking about how long they've been a fan and how long they've been going and how frustrated they are. And it's like, look, read the room. Nobody like ask the question, then let someone else ask a question. This is a very rare opportunity for us all to hold them directly to account. But it's not because these people are like bad people, and look, not everyone has like great microphone craft, not everyone is like a politician or a public speaker or anything like that. I get that. Like, I'm not expecting like a level of like professional, like super slick professional questions, and people will get emotional. And yeah, there was a bit of shouting down and stuff, which I think always like brings things to a close. It makes it easier to shut things down, but it's one of those things, isn't it? You can't really control the behavior of crowds. It's a bit like if you get busy public transport in rush hour, everyone's rushing around and it changes everyone's behavior and everyone gets more frantic and less considerate. And when you're panicked and stressed, like, decorum is one of the first things to go. That's just very natural. So I think you're right. I think for me, it's more possibly like a bit of just a frustration of, will you stop rambling on? And from my point of view, I used to be an investigator, right? So like it's probably like a slightly snobbish thing on my part. Like I was trained to ask questions. So like when you're trained to do something like that, you pick up bad practice in others very, very easily. And I'm sure there's a million things that I do that, in terms of elocution and things like that other people are trained in, and they think, oh God, will you stop doing that? That's really bad practice, so it's more likely to become a foible for you. So I didn't really have a huge problem with the tone of the questions that were asked. People are annoyed, and I think rightly so. I literally wrote a column a week ago called "We Care, You Don't," which was effectively a 1,200 word rant about, Arsenal is an investment vehicle and the owners don't care and things like that. So like I share that frustration, and I totally take the please stop wibbling into the microphone for 3 minutes, he says, having wibbled into his own microphone for 3 minutes.
31 minutes at this point, just for the record.
to ask your question and everything. The thing I had a problem with personally, and this is not just because of my quote unquote connection to the women's team, is when Joe Montemuro came in. Lots of people filed out, which is kind of fine. Not everyone has to care about that, but loads of people just started talking in their seats, like as if to say, well, I don't care about this, so nobody else does. And it was a real, I thought, lack of courtesy to Joe and to the people who wanted to actually sit there and listen to him. There were quite a few times where even I had to yell, like, shut up. Like, if you know,
well, you know my take on this too. I mean, look, you got a bunch of people in the room who are there presumably because of their intense love for and support for the club that is Arsenal, and all of these things that are supposed to be related to Arsenal and stand for Arsenal. And one of the reasons for their outrage is they don't feel that Arsenal stands for the things they want it to stand for anymore. And here's the coach of the most successful part of that club right now, a really interesting and intelligent man who's going to speak to you about a part of the club that is actually leading the way in a very real and important sense, and you're going to just walk out or talk over that. That kind of undermines your claim to being a super fan.
And absolutely. And Joe talked about this because he grew up as an Arsenal fan. He's from Italian kind of background, and he was talking about, I've met Liam Brady tonight. He was my idol when I was younger. But one of the things he talks about, I know he talks about this a lot with the players, about like representing Arsenal, almost like George Graham-esque, that whole ties and blazers thing. It's like, look at where you work every day, look at who you play for, look at that like lovely big badge when you drive into the training ground. And he drills it into those players, like, look at how privileged you are to come and play for Arsenal. And when he talks about stuff like that, and we talk about the disconnection and disengagement as fans and how we feel like we've lost that identity. And here's someone from the other side of the world who 100% espouses it. And I promise you, he does it every single time you talk to him. He talks about, like, he uses the word brand unabashedly about Arsenal. He always has done. He talks about like brand of football. We want the Arsenal, like we want to represent the Arsenal brand. Like this is a guy who I think really gets it. And you're right. It was very disappointing. That so many people, not that they just didn't want to listen to that, because again, I get that not everyone.
You're allowed to be interested in what you're interested in. Sure.
Yeah. But like just to like talk over him while he's talking about why he's saying these things that I think they'd be really interested in, whether they're interested in like the ins and outs of the women's team or not. I think he was saying something that would have really appealed to them, and I thought it was kind of a shame that. That there was kind of a lack of courtesy there, I guess. That was the thing that annoyed me.
Look, Tim, people get really mad at me that I interrupt you guys, and you're just a panel of regular guys talking into a microphone, and this is a coach of an Arsenal team. Come on. Just as a final point then, while I never think that anybody should, I shouldn't say never, well, I think in general, a lack of decorum and rudeness and open expressions of anger towards people in these settings is unpleasant. If you had to look at a potential positive to come from that, do you think in any respect, or is this just pure putting a positive spin on it, that kind of behavior, that kind of reaction, some of the shouting down, some of the anger that transmitted itself to the dais, do you think it is a wake-up call for Edu, Raul, and Vinai in terms of the delta between the hope and optimism they may have for the direction of the club and the very real sense of frustration among the support?
So I don't think it was news to Raul and Vinai. Raul and Vinai have attended a few fans forums and things like that. And, Raul told like a little anecdote about the last fans forum I was at. I had to stop people who kept asking me, like Arsenal fans who kept asking me, why on earth did you leave Barcelona for Arsenal? And he was saying, look, we have to stop like trashing our club like this, because I did leave Barca for Arsenal, and, I didn't have to do that, and I did it because I was attracted to this project and everything. But so I think they've had enough interaction with fans. This was their first like supporters club Q&A in this kind of environment, but I think those two have got their ears to the ground about it a little. It may have been a bit of a shock for Edu, who's only been at the club for a few days, and obviously it's a different club to the one he left 14 years ago. So maybe it was a bit of a shock to him. But listen, he's been doing this role in Brazil for over a decade. And I promise you, if you think that Arsenal is a hostile environment, then, he worked for Corinthians when some Corinthians fans were so unhappy with Alessandro Pato that about 50 of them broke into the training ground with crowbars to try and get him, basically. So so a bit of kind of shouting down at a Q&A, it might have given Edu a sense of the very real frustration, but I don't think it's anything he hasn't seen before. So I think there's kind of all of that to it. They didn't talk about this, but I guess my one hope is that I hope that at least Josh is not as distant as Stan. And I do hear things about, he's in London once a month, he's at Colney once a month, he's more regularly in touch with, the executive branch. They didn't talk about the Cronkies at all. Who are kind of, it would have been nice for Josh to be there, really, I think. But there we go. But, I think that's the hope, because really we've got to hope these guys know what they're doing. And that if they don't, Josh will be more on top of it than Stan was with the previous incumbents.
All you can ask for, I think, at this point from ownership is more engagement. And I don't mean engagement like hashtag engagement, like tweeting at us. Mm-hmm. I mean literally like being engaged with the day-to-day operations of the club. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's realistic to say all you can ask for from them is £100 million in cash, but you can ask for a little more engagement, involvement. And if that's happening, then that's a positive. So before we let you go, Tim, do you want to weigh in on anything that's happened? I mean, in particular, Ceballos and Saliba deals, you feeling pretty positive about both of those? Yeah,
I think so. Obviously, it's not absolutely ideal that like we have to loan one back and we've only got the other one on loan. I think the Ceballos one is actually a really good deal. He sounds like exactly the sort of player I think we need. He sounds like he's got a spikiness to him in terms of his character as well, and I like that. Like I like that in, I kind of like the fact that he's saying, no, I haven't given up on Real Madrid, and I hope that's a really good sign that at least for the season we have him, he's super motivated. We talked this time last year, didn't we, about Guendouzi kind of being the sort of guy who says, I don't care if I'm 19 and I played in Ligue 2, like I should be playing. And I think we do need a bit more of that. Look, it's also just a consequence of where we are. We can't buy Ceballos at the moment because we don't have the money and we're not attractive enough. And, we have to be looking at deals like Saliba for the long term. So, yeah, I think I'm... Raul said, at the Q&A, they're obviously both very different types of signings with very different expectations. But I'm broadly pretty positive about both of them. It doesn't mean we should be anywhere near finished. Because really only one of those is actually going to improve our team next season. But I'm pretty positive about both of them. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, good to hear. Well, Tim's on Twitter at Stilberto. Thanks as always, Tim.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and we'll obviously be doing a lot more coming up. We'll have our huge monster loaded out season preview episode just a little bit further down the line. Between now and then, obviously, we'll be covering the preseason games. But I do want to let you know, we're trying to do a lot of fun stuff, and hopefully we're putting out _enough pods for you. We got a YouTube show next week planned, a special YouTube show that I'm going to keep secret for a little bit. But if you want to know more about Saliba, Scott at _that_crab did an amazing scouting video for Saliba that is available for patrons, and then we did an episode to talk about it, the Ceballos arrival, and some Nicolas Pepe rumors. So that's on Patreon. Later today on Patreon, Giant Gooner, Matt, is coming on to do a really deep statistical dive on Ceballos, who he is, the kind of player he is based on the data, and we'll get into all the nitty-gritty about that, get granular on positioning, where he might play for us, whose position he might be taking, and the impact he could have. So if you've been interested in Patreon, it might be a good time to try it. If you are not, totally understand. Totally appreciate it. No big deal. We love you, and we're glad that you're here for this, and that's what matters. So either way, lots of good stuff, and hopefully lots of good stuff to come from Arsenal in the days to come. So we will take a break. When we get back, Paul will join, Clive will join. We'll talk the Ozil situation probably just a little bit, the Ozil Kola situation, because I think it deserves a mention. We'll talk about the Madrid game, and of course, the arrival of our two vaunted signings, one of whom will not play for us, and the other will only play for us for a season. But they're still signings, and we're going to talk about it. So stay with us. We'll be back right after this. All right, we're back, and now the show can start in earnest because we've got Paul here. He's on Twitter at PosInMyPants. Hello, Pos.
Woohoo.
Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Hello, Clive.
Hello.
Was just filling Clive's head with all kinds of positive reinforcement about all the great comments and messages and reviews he gets, so he will be impossible to live with this episode. But how will that be different from any other episode? Look, if you could go to your podcast player and give us a 5-star review, we would love it. And if you could say something nice about me, that would be fine, because what I'm noticing increasingly is that people don't really like me. Now, I get it. I'm not particularly, what's the word I'm looking for here? Likeable? But, you don't want me just whimpering into the microphone. I mean, maybe you do. In that case, write more nasty things about me. Just give us a 5-star review. That's what matters most. In any event, we love you, and we're going to get on to a variety of topics. So I want to start in sort of a weird place just because it is top of the news, and I think we have to address it. And I don't think it needs a deep discussion. But for God's sakes, Clive, that's some scary shit that just went on with Ozil and Kolasinac the other day. It is easy to joke around about it and make light of it, but it is also easy to see how that could have ended in, serious bodily harm, death. It's one of those things that from a distance on social media, anything can become a meme or a joke, but that's really scary stuff.
Yeah, it is, and I'm afraid it's a microcosm of some parts of life, of London life, really. This sort of scooter crime is really prevalent. People stealing phones and carjacking, but did you see the size of those knives? Joking, that is no joke.
That's a butcher knife, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's scary. Look, the funny...
Or as Kolasinac calls them, toothpicks.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, Paul, here's the interesting thing, right? There's a part of me that first is like, yeah, Cola, and you're the man, and fuck yeah, that's awesome. And then there's a part of me that's sort of like, what are you doing? Don't attack the guy with a huge knife. This is one of those situations that leads me to wonder, does the club have a responsibility to be providing any more security, or is it a simple fact that as a citizen of society where there is crime, and let's remind everybody, there's crime everywhere. We're not going to get political about this, but there's crime everywhere. Is it fair for the club to be expected to shield their players from all crime at all times?
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of questions there. It's a shocker to me. I lived in England for like 5 years. Spent a lot of time in London. Things I don't know. Things have really escalated there. I can't relate to this knife crime stuff. There was a lot of jokes around Kolasinac, but it's hard, right? If you see the video is kind of almost comedic, and there's Kolasinac handles it so well, and the guys on the bikes look like they're about to shit themselves. So you get the reactions from, I think, the people watch the video, but then you read the story and you realize just how much fucking trouble there was. And, you know, them pursuing Ozil in the vehicle, and he's running into the restaurant with, I believe it's their two wives or women with them. I mean, that's scary shit. And then they run into this Turkish restaurant that he frequents and he knows. I mean, that's kind of, I mean, there's just an amazing story around this, that he would do that run away from them into a Turkish restaurant. The staff then all pile up to the front because they all know Ozil, obviously, and they're like, this is fucking movie scene stuff. And you know, the moped guys then do a fucking runner. But why would they keep going? I mean, there's just so many angles and questions to it. I mean, at some point you'd think the moped guys would say, we picked the wrong fucking fight here and the wrong people here. Do they actually think they're not going to get caught? That guy gets paid $350K a week. They don't think he has the resources to track them down. Do they know what they were doing? Do they know what they were getting into? I mean, I hope they're hung up by their fucking balls.
They don't care, Paul. They don't care, mate. Yeah, it's a much bigger social discussion about people that are feeling completely disenfranchised and left behind by society. And when it comes to it, they wanted that car. It's a very popular car. They wanted that car. They don't care. Anyone who frequents the Hornsey Road by the Tollington, and we all see Ozil come past every single home game, we all know what cars he's got. We all know what cars he's got, and if we all know, other people know, and it's just I'm afraid to say, it's parts of London life, and that's what's happening.
There were lots of jokes, obviously, about Kolasinac, and like there's a humor side. I mean, you got to have a sense of humor.
You got to laugh to stop from crying, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of fucking tension that comes with this, and there's gallows humor. The joke that wasn't made was about Ozil knows how to find space, right? Yeah. He knows how to protect the ball, and he knows how to find space, and that's what he did. He did the fucking smart thing, got the women out of there, got himself out of there, and you know, he went into a pocket of space. He does what he does naturally, and I think, you know, everybody's second guessing what went on. There were a lot of stupid comments, but you just can't second guess people in that situation. Even, you know, Kolasinac, I hear exactly what you're saying, Elliot. I mean, it's a terrible example in one way. On the other hand, that's probably what you're going to do if you're built like Kolasinac. If that's how you're made, you're just going to react in the instant. I mean, you see them coming off the bike with that fucking long knife. He's going to do what he did. You're not going to, you know, what are you going to do?
Yeah. I mean, look, the other thing about this, too, is there is a cultural divide here for me as an American, because if something like this goes down in America, and let's not pretend this is just about London, this happens all over the world, and it happens in this country, and the biggest difference to me listening to this is this would be gun crime if it was here, you know?
Yeah.
And that ends quite differently. I do think that these footballers maybe have to appreciate that they are targets, because there is the expectation that they'll be wearing $50,000 watches, driving $200,000 cars, carrying loads of cash, you know, that their wives or girlfriends will be wearing tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars of jewelry. And while it is never your responsibility to not be a target for crime, it is the responsibility of society to protect you from crime and of criminals not to commit crime. I wonder if it just gives them a little think about how they travel and making themselves less of a target. I mean, Clive, in terms of going forward, do you think, you know, there was a picture that Kolasinac tweeted out of him and Ozil sort of smiling and sort of joking about it, a fist emoji. I mean, I get the sense that they came through this all right. Do you worry at all about this having a knock-on effect? I mean, psychologically, this can really be damaging to you.
It could be. When you sit back and realize afterwards, but I got a funny feeling that psychologically, Kolasinac is quite comfortable in those type of scenarios. You know, let's not mess about here. The guy was seriously moving his feet to fight somebody. He is not someone that has not done this before. He looked pretty comfortable in what was going on. I know adrenaline takes over, and for Ozil, who's just refining his mentality, I hope it doesn't put him back into a place where he, can be a little bit aloof and adrift from what he's done in the first two or three games I've seen him. So, yeah, you know what? It's life, and sometimes you just can't explain why these things happen to you, but it happens to people all the time. One of my neighbours got his BMW carjacked near where I live, and it's like, wow, it makes you think about what's going on in the world, right? But head up.
It's really scary. That is really scary. I mean, it's funny.
You can't be trapped.
Because I moved to New York City in 1997, and, when I was 4 years old. No, that was after college. Yeah, I'm an old guy, too. But that was right after the period. So Rudy Giuliani became mayor, and we don't have to get into the politics of whether you liked him or didn't like him. But in the era just before when I moved there was literally something called mugging culture, where you'd carry mugging cash in a certain pocket, so that when you got mugged, you gave them the mugging cash. It was very transactional and very expected. And literally, this stuff went on all the time. And it's just crazy that people lived that way. Thankfully, it's changed a lot, but it is what it is. Let's move on, and hopefully Sad and Mesut are okay, emotionally okay. I'm glad they came through it all right. And, look, I know it sounds crazy to overthink this stuff, but maybe, just maybe, there's also an aspect to this. They're already close friends, but if it enhances sort of Kolasinac's reputation within the squad and makes him feel more like a leader, then God bless. I mean, you try to find positives from things like this. But let's get on to the football. Before we talk,
it makes them real. I think that's what it does.
Yeah, it certainly humanizes them. Absolutely. And I think all the comments yesterday, not all of them, because it's social media, the overwhelming majority were supportive of the two of them, supportive of Kolasinac and what he did to protect his friend and his family. And that's great to see, everyone coming together like that. So on to the football. Before we get to the Madrid game, let's get to the transfers. I want to start with the Ceballos deal. Paul, this is a guy that I think all of us on the pod were universally excited about. But before we talk about him, the player, how do you feel about Arsenal relying on a loan move? I think there are some people that just generally feel that a loan is beneath the club in some way or another, not a transaction that is befitting the size of the club, that we should be looking to go buy players, that getting this guy in on loan is not something that's deserving of credit. My personal take is that it's a savvy way to extend a budget that is limited through no fault of Raul or Vinai or Edu or Emery. How do you feel about the use of the loan market this way?
For Ceballos.
Yes.
Yeah. I've been practicing after his video yesterday. I'm going to be very, very on that on the pod. Look, I think it's a savvy move. It's not ideal because we've seen with our own players going on loan. From the player's standpoint, you're basically a second citizen, possibly a third citizen. So, and that works both ways. It means the squad you're going to doesn't usually take full advantage of your capabilities. So I think in general, I'm not too keen on it, and I understand people being holding their nose at the idea that we have to get a lone player for a key position. I mean, you could argue this is replacing Ramsey, who was and should have been even more key to us last season. And you could argue this is very much the function of the fact that we didn't get a fee for Ramsey. We should have got 30, 40, who knows what million for Ramsey leaving the club, but we didn't do that. That's all true, but it's as a wise man I once knew always said, you're at where you're at. So we're at where we're at. They did what they could. I think he's a perfect player for us. When I think in most scenarios when we've said what player would you most want, what role would you most want to add to the squad, I'll generally go for a really top class midfielder. The kind of piece you can put in a midfield that everybody else can play with. And we have some good midfielders, but we haven't solved our midfield conundrums by any means. And to me, from what I can see of Ceballos, he is the kind of player who can play with basically anybody else we've got in our midfield, and we haven't had that with one since Santi, and even Santi had his quirks, right? He wasn't the biggest guy. He could play with everybody, but he still wasn't quite the all singing and all dancing midfielder. He just happened to be brilliant. Before that, you had Arteta, and he tended to sit a little deeper and didn't have the full range that an all singing, all dancing. Oh, also, he was a little older. I think this is the first time since maybe Fabregas we've had an all singing, all dancing midfielder. I think it's brilliant business. Emery knows him. They'll click. So I don't think this will be like other loan. At least I'm hopeful it won't be. I think very quickly this guy can play a role and become a full member. I think he'll prove himself on the pitch. He may not start. The other good thing is he has the chance to get in before we've really got our season going and nail down a place when other midfielders aren't there. And I'm not talking against the midfielders who aren't there, Guendouzi or whatever, but it does open the window for him to start to play a role, prove himself out. And if he clicks the way he should click, he makes his own case within the squad. I mean, there is a hierarchy. There are players who are established. There are players who will be pissed off that all things being equal, they're not starting ahead of him because actually they're on our books and will be there when this guy's gone probably in a year's time. So there are a number of things against him getting the full usage he should. But I think his ability to impact play, he'll very quickly prove himself, and the squad in general will accept that it makes sense that we play him whenever it makes sense, and that'll be often. I think he could be a real starter for us throughout this season, despite the fact he's a lone player. Yeah,
I mean, I guess I take issue with calling him an all-singing, all-dancing midfielder only because I think, well, and it's unclear. Look, I don't know that he can do the final third part of the job. I think he can do the middle third. But what's ironic is for Madrid,
I agree with that.
But here's what's interesting. For Madrid, he basically didn't do anything in the final third. Basically didn't score. Basically didn't assist. I think he played 3 through balls ever. Like literally ever, 3.
He's never in the box. I mean, I've watched hours and hours of him. He never goes in the box.
But for Spain, he adds that, which is interesting. He played more of a number 10 role, more advanced, and added some end product for Spain. So
under 21s, though,
yeah, well, exactly, and that's really the question: is can he add that to his game at club level and be more of the Ramsey replacement in the final third, more of an Ozil alternative with more drive and more pressing and more running, or is he more of a Xhaka replacement, someone who adds athleticism and movement to a position that's been very static? I mean, he is a player who does turn the ball over a bit and lost the ball and was dribbled past a bit. So,
and I think he's an all-singing and all-dancing central midfielder.
Yeah, fair enough.
He really operates getting you from the middle third to the final third. And then if you're laying siege to a team that's sitting deep, he's not going to do the killer ball into the 6-yard box. He's the guy folding the passes, moving it from side to side. And he doesn't do big swinging passes. It's all quick, fast. He'll do flicks and twists and turns, and he'll beat a guy, but only for the purpose of kind of getting that next ball. He's not even really a pre-assister. He's a pre-assister. I mean,
for God's sakes.
He'll accelerate. Well, but I think you're trying to solve a different problem.
No, I get you. I just
and we haven't fixed that problem. Our midfield is bog average most of the time. We should have the best operating midfield in terms of passing, acceleration. He would beat a guy and make a quick pass and set it off, whereas somebody like Santi might have scorched up the middle, having beaten one guy, beat another guy, and then lay a ball off just as he's getting into the box. Ceballos passes really quickly, moves it on. He's like an accelerator pedal to the passing movement. He's high touch, high pass, gets rid of it quickly, gets us accelerated. He'd be really good on the counter, starting a counter.
Yeah,
he's going to be the platform for our final third players. That's the way I see him, and that's I think it's great.
Yeah, and that's why I like him as a potential Xhaka alternative, because I still think we can play on the first touch more, move the ball quicker, elude pressure, and progress the ball quicker. No one's going to give you what Xhaka does in terms of deep distribution or long distribution from deep. But I think if we can replace that with better pace of movement of the ball, upping the tempo, I would love that. So, Clive, for you, what qualities of his game do you think improve us, and what position do you think you see that slotting into the most? Maybe, who could be vulnerable to their minutes being taken up by him?
I think it's a smart move. The reason why I think it allows two players to develop in our academy, in Smith Rowe and Willock. So it allows them one more year to, maybe one will go on loan and one will stay. I think Willock will stay, but it'll allow him to have really good, strong minutes in some of the games we want him to have minutes in, knowing that for some of the more, we need a bit more experience. We have a player that can come into midfield and play that role. I see Xhaka as a 6. I don't see Ceballos as a 6, although there may be 3 Ceballos we're talking about here. There was a player a few years ago playing for Real Betis when he was a behind-the-ball midfielder at all times. Right? That's what he was. Then there's the Real Madrid midfielder. Well, you're at Real Madrid. You've got Isco, Bale, Modric, Cruz, Ronaldo, Benzema. Should I just keep going on? I'll tell you where you stand. You stand exactly where those guys are not standing. That's where you play. Do you see what I mean? And he is a junior player, so I wouldn't take an identity, a strong identity from the Madrid game, because he is a junior player in that system. He's a player that plays the League Cup games for them, if you see what I mean, the smaller games. So I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. I think the player that we're signing is the player given responsibility, and the closest we've seen of that when he's given responsibility is playing for Spain under 21s. So I see him as more as an 8-10 rather than a 6-8. That makes sense, Elliot and Paul, because I see him in that role, and I've watched him in that role, and I think his skill set suits that role. I just think he has an amazing ability to create a yard for a pass. He's got the older satellite dish on, Cesc Fabregas style, when people are rushing him. But he's much better press resistant, similar to Santi on the dribble, and he's got a banging shot. So yes, he's got Ramsey's shirt, but Ramsey played that role he played it in an off-the-ball way. So now we have an on-the-ball player that can help us progress. And what did we talk about the other week, Elliot, about ball progression and getting shots, right? This is exactly what we need. People that can help us with our build-up in a non-passing way. Have the ability to manage ourselves out of the press. Pop, pop, off we go. Let's get it to our danger men. So I think it's a very smart signing from a stylistic point of view, but also from a development point of view. So that I'm saying that based on the fact that we think he's going back. And there are rumours that if he plays a certain amount of games, 30 games, then there's an option to buy that gets triggered. Right? So that's what I've read. But I don't know how true that is. Right? So I'm going to assume he's going back. So if he's going back, that means we have Smith Rowe and Willock 1 year nearer the promised land, where I feel they have a skill set which is similar between the two of them that we can replace quite quickly.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say, I was with you completely, Clive. I was sort of of the opinion there's just no way he stays with us, because either the loan doesn't work out and we don't want to buy him, or the loan does work out and Madrid want to reincorporate him, and of course he wants to be at Madrid. In talking to Scott for the thing we did on Patreon, like he sort of suggested that he felt it could be a case where it does work out. He likes playing a lot. He likes succeeding with Arsenal, maybe helps us into the Champions League, sees more of a future here in the short term, and decides he wants to stay and we can work something out with Madrid. And he pointed to the Kovacic situation at Chelsea as an example. So, I mean, maybe that is possible. I'm not totally sure I agree, but
I think it is possible.
And the guy and Zidane don't get on.
Exactly.
They've
all
had
I'm saying
words,
to you is that
who
the
knows?
primary words we're being fed is that there is no buyback option. But I think there could be in there somewhere within the contract. It's just something that I've read. I don't know if I believe it or not. So I'm just giving you feedback based on the fact that there is no option. That's what we're being fed. But I think there's a good chance, if he does well, and that he could stay. And I hope that works out.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, first things first, let's get him into the side and improve the weaknesses in our midfield. And I think he does that. He definitely has qualities we have lacked in a variety of positions in midfield. And I think he gives us two areas of flexibility that I'm particularly excited about. One is being able to play that midfield 3 that, Clive, you've said for a while, we just don't have the players for it. I think now we do. I think you can play the 4-3-3 with him. But I think the other thing it does, if we have to go to the back three, which I think is dreadful and I hope we don't have to, but if we do, the only time that ever really worked was with Ramsey in it, because he was a little more progressive and Xhaka could sit and Ramsey could go. And I think maybe you could recreate that with Ceballos, or what are we saying? Ceballos. I'm just going to say Ceballos. Ceballos and Torreira, or Xhaka and Ceballos even potentially. So I think it gives us flexibility. I think it lets us play formations that have been trickier. Now, I admit with the 4-3-3, you still have the fullback issue to worry about, but maybe Tierney or whatever, who knows. Anyway, let's talk Saliba really quickly before we get on to the Madrid game. Paul, we've talked about Saliba. I don't think there's a lot to get into because we won't see him play for us this season, but he seems to be a guy that everybody is really high on, that has a very, very high ceiling, that can be really, really good. I watched Scott's scouting video for him. He does look really impressive. I mean, are you excited to see the club doing things that protect the future, given that we've been very short-termist in our thinking recently?
Yeah, I mean, if he's everything people say, I think Matt Spiro, who follows the French league, said yesterday he was the most exciting thing since, I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody very good from a while ago. This guy is apparently the business. So it'll be interesting to see how he develops, though, physically as well. I mean, he's going to get a lot bigger, was his first point, even in the next 12 months. I mean, he doesn't look as fleet-footed as Virgil van Dijk, but he looks pretty mobile. He looks strong in all the categories, as I understand it, but has plenty of improvement to come. I think it's great that he's, in many ways, I mean, I just don't think he'd be ready, even if they'd sell him to us now, to go into our league. I think we might ruin him. I think we all know why we might ruin him. Just our dysfunction bleeding into him. That he needs to become here a more complete player than he already is. So I think it's a perfect move. I don't think we spend a lot of money on him in the first year. I think we probably are buying them a few million, not half his fee or a third of his fee. They're getting the full use of him in this year. I think we pay them a little bit of money and we start paying real money in other years. It's a why wouldn't you kind of deal. I'm sure we're quite capable of moving the money around the shell game when we need to. Whatever our budget is, whether it's 45 million or whatever, as accountants, they can pretty easily move money around. I bet this hasn't taken a penny out of the budget that Mr. Emery came into the window with. I think this was a planned deal. I think we know that there were serious conversations that started in something like April of this year. So it's not even like it's something that came up when the window or after the window started. I think this one's in plan, isn't part of Emery's budget. I think it costs us nothing, and I think it's a great move. This is exactly the kind of thing we should be doing. The only problem is he would not be the first 17 or 18-year-old the club signed that never ended up doing anything for us at any level. This guy seems to be a higher caliber guy, but I mean, I was pretty excited about Bielik when he came in based on his profile, and 20 others who came in at 17 or 18. We got Martinelli coming in at that age. So it's still a very young age, but apparently this guy's the real deal, and is beyond that level. So hopefully he turns into what we hope he should turn into. Well, how many years' time? Still actually seems kind of young and still forming based on everything. If what I've already said has merit to it, he'll still be pretty bloody young when we get him next year, and we still have plenty of time to spoil him. So hopefully we get our shit together with another strong centre back to pair with him.
Yeah, I mean, look, looking at the future is great. We still have to find a way to play in the present, so we still need a centre back. But Clive, I mean, I look at everything we've tried to do in central defense for years and years and years and years. There was the trolley dash that brought us Mertesacker. That worked for a bit. He partnered pretty well with Koscielny. Koscielny worked on and off. I think it is inaccurate to say he was flawless. I think he was very good with flaws in his game that were more exploited at times and less exploited at others. But basically, we haven't had a clue. We haven't had what's the rhyming slang for when you don't have a Scooby? You don't have
Scooby-Doo?
You don't have a Scoobies about how to bring in a center back or develop a center back from our academy. So like, if we've got a guy who could be a long-term solution at a long-term pain point for us at a time when other clubs are spending 60, 70, 80 million pounds to bring in established center backs that can dominate for them, I absolutely love it. And I have no problem with putting it off a season because guess what? We still have to be good next season and the season beyond and the season beyond, and we're paying basically nothing for him now. So, I mean, would you have restructured it to bring him in sooner? Would you have liked to have seen him come in? Do you just want us to go out and get a short-term fix for this season? How do you feel about the way we've structured this deal and the excitement of potentially having a future start center back?
Yeah, I sort of, on this one, I sort of leave it to professionals, really. We're all desperate.
I wouldn't recommend it.
A centre back now, but it doesn't mean that we should miss an opportunity to get somebody that could be a superstar centre back in a year's time. So again, it's outsmarting the market. That's what we were told, right? So they're trying to look at the market in a different way, and I sort of applaud it. It sort of leans towards a little bit of planning. So yeah, the player looks great, doesn't he? I mean, did you see the Instagram video that he did posted himself?
Can we break that down a little bit? There are two things I want to ask you about. The close-up of the needle going in the vein and Raul in the back. Paul noticed Raul in the background jamming out to some hip-hop music. I mean, that hype video is my everything now. Why don't we get more of these?
Yeah, he looked very good in it, right? So and I think, yeah, it's exciting for the future, and yeah, he seems like a cool dude. And I've got a son that's 18, and trust me, he's not like him, right? So this is a guy that's way ahead of his time. He is super mature, doing things that none of us were doing at 18. He's playing in France's top league, and he's running the show back there. The potential is scary. Absolutely scary. If we're buying a player like that, and in 2 years' time, what's he going to be like? And Paul was mentioning that he may not be quite as fleet as foot as Virgil van Dijk. Well, I watched Virgil van Dijk at Celtic. He used to play half asleep most of the time. He was dozy in the team, and he's fleet of foot now at 27. This kid is 18, so what's he going to be like? He looks pretty quick to me on the videos I've watched. But hey, that's just football, and we'll see what happens when he comes over. So I like it. I just think what we're going to do now with the gaps that we have, and I feel as though as fans we won't be excited until we see the holes filled, and there's a hole at centre half that needs filling, and it could increase if our club captain decides to go back to the south of France, and I think we have to do something, and it's not a left back. And it's not a Dennis Ceballos. We have to do something there, and maybe it is another loan. Maybe it is a loan until we can get Holding back to fitness, until we can get Saliba in next year. Maybe a smart loan gives us the time and the budget. It helps us in all different ways. So yeah, I'm watching that space, mate. Watching that space.
Yeah. All right. Well, I mean, I realize that it is hard for people to get excited about something they don't get to watch this season, but let's take a deep breath and be excited that the club are doing some things that improve us long term, given that one of the principal concerns recently has been the short-termist thinking. So before we get onto the Madrid game, which could be a whole podcast in itself, and maybe if there was a competent organizer and host of this, we would have done it that way, but there isn't. Let's quickly touch on what the fuck is going on with rumors about Zaha and Pepe and all this shit. So what I'm starting to think is that there is a warring, stalking horse, bitter rumor mill thing going on. We're trying to get Palace to come down to where we need them to be for Zaha. So we put out rumors that we've switched our attention to Pepe. So they put out that Everton have come in with a bid for Zaha. Which of this makes sense, Paul? If you had to put your money on what's real and what's not, is none of it real? Is some of it real? Is all of it just posturing? How does this play out?
I don't think the Pepe stuff is remotely credible, and therefore I don't think us pretending to be playing the Pepe card is feasible. I don't think it's going to impact on Palace. The rumor is 4 clubs have committed to pay 80 million on Pepe. I mean, that's not that. That isn't even going on with Zaha, right? That's not how it works. 4 clubs don't sign up at the 80 million pound or dollar level, whatever the fuck it is. in a neat line, and then away. One of them's Liverpool. Are Liverpool going to splash 80 million on Pepe? They don't fucking need him. It just doesn't hold water. That just seems like shite on the Pepe side. And there's been a lot of Pepe doing the rounds, talking to all the clubs. I understand that, but that one seems like agent talk and not credible, and doesn't help us with Zaha. In fact, it might even hurt us, because hey, we got 80 million. So I just don't see Arsenal pushing we've got 80 million and we've already agreed to spend it on Zaha or on Pepe as being a great argument to say why we can only pay 55 million for your Zaha guy. But the rumours coming the other way, with Everton being at 55 million and willing to go higher. That's kind of got to be agent talk, because you don't say we're bidding 55 million, but we're also willing to pay 70 million to your club, which was the rumor from 2 days ago. But the Everton stuff seems real. They're quite happy to be out in the market saying, we'll pay what Arsenal will. We're the new Arsenal. In fact, they have our spot we're after. So it's all good news on their side. I think the Everton rumors are probably credible, coming from multiple sides, and something they do need and would want. The Chelsea would take him and basically loan him back, or pre-agree. That's not right, because they can't buy anybody, but they might pre-agree for 12 months from now. May have some credibility because he wants to stay in London, blah, 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 but then he's a year older. So I think the Zaha rumours are pretty credible, and probably closely related to truth. The other shit's all kind of bogusy, agenty stuff. I think that we're clearly focused on Zaha, so we see a route to goal here, and we're going to up it, and we're hoping Zaha will push from the other side. That's the other thing with the rumours. You can't depress Zaha that our attention has gone somewhere else if you want him to push to get to Arsenal from his side. So I would imagine there's good communication with Zaha, that they have this feel. That's what I always think went wrong with sorry to bring up the Suarez at Liverpool thing. That thing all turned sour when Suarez decided he didn't want to push from his side. That's when it all went belly up. Had he decided he was going to push all the way to the end, Liverpool would have had a really ugly situation on their hands. And I think we were assuming Suarez would do what he always said he was going to do, and he did a U-turn on us. If Zaha pushes all the way through, we meet in the middle. We pay more than I want us to pay, but it's somewhere between the 80 million and the 40-something million we're at, and it's probably something like 60 million.
Yeah. All of that sort of lines up. Clive, we had a bit of an online, very short debate on this that I wanted to expand with you. Someone asked us, would you prefer Pepe or Zaha for the money being equal? And I think you were leaning Zaha. Do you still feel that way? And do you still think that could come off?
Yeah, I think I still feel that way. Only because I've got to be honest, right? I just know more about Zaha, right? I know Pepe from a stat zone app. You see what I mean? I know Pepe from a statistical point of view. And I've watched Zaha for years, and I really like him. And I can see him offering a lot to the left-hand slot of our attack inside. I know he's been to every Premiership ground, home and away, and I just know that it has a greater chance of success. So what do we do as fans is we start to then think about the numbers, the age, the resell, his passing, mate, I've seen this guy rip people from a second striker perspective, as a lone striker, from the right and from the left, and that's it. So I do lean towards it. I think there are three players that are out there: there's Everton, Suarez, Pepe, and Zaha. I think two are smoke screens, and one is what we're after. And all the other things that are happening around it are just noise. I hope we get him at the right price. The fact that the report said today that Everton have offered 60 plus a player, really, that could be code for, there you go, Arsenal, that's our price point. Get to 55, 60 plus a player, then we're up, then we're talking. It's just communication styles. It's just it. I'm hopeful that Zaha comes, but not to say I don't like the other players, because you can't, recent YouTubes, you can't fail not to like them. But I think Zaha would be a more guaranteed success at Arsenal, and I honestly feel, and this is a bit more of a cultural thing, and as a Londoner or someone who grew up close to London, and Zaha also being a London guy who wants to play for the club, I think that holds weight. I'm not being a fanboy when I say that.
That's absolutely fair, of course.
I think it absolutely holds weight. You know, I want players that want to be here, that really
aren't using the club
here
as a stepping stone to the next thing. Let's make no mistake about it. Pepe comes to Arsenal. You got to believe in the back of his mind, he's thinking, put yourself in the shop window with a couple good seasons and off you go to Madrid, you know?
Yeah, exactly. He wants to get to the Premier League to earn the big money, and I don't blame him. Most of the players in Europe do, and Liverpool. I know we're thinking with Liverpool's first 11, they don't need him, but actually, they've got two of their players, maybe three. Their front three have all played in tournaments. Is that right? African nations and the Copa America. So they've literally just hit their sunbeds now. They played right the way through to the Champions League final. Firmino had some injury problems last year. If I'm Klopp, I'm thinking, if I want to go for a league, I'm not going to get through this season with my top boys up front staying injury free. So he may invest. They may invest in a Pepe, and it makes real sense for them. I think Pepe may end up at PSG, actually. I don't think he's going to end up towards Arsenal. If PSG lose Neymar, I think they're obviously going to go and get him straight away, and that's their French star, French league star back into their team. I think Zaha suits Arsenal. I don't think Everton will do it. Chelsea whispered as well. They've got to wait a year. He's a good player. And I think for Arsenal, he could be a very good player, and that's the bit. I don't think we've seen him yet, be part of a top team rather than carrying a team and staving off relegation. I think we could see a whole new different player.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, either way, I guess whatever you want to happen and whatever does happen, if either any of these players arrive, it would be a hell of a lot of fun, I think. Clive, as a final point on that, and then we'll get on to the Madrid game, would you at least acknowledge that you see why, from sort of a economic sustainability kind of standpoint, some people might lean towards the Pepe deal?
Absolutely.
He arrives at 24, he plays for 3 seasons, he leaves for 80 million. I mean, there's a sustainability element to that might appeal to some people just in terms of trying to keep the club ticking over.
Absolutely, totally understand it. And there's also, I totally understand it. It makes financial and fiscal sense going forward, all right? So, and there's nothing wrong with that view. And if that's your view, great. I tend to think about things like when Ian Wright signed as a 28-and-a-half-year-old and what he ended up doing for this club, the potential of somebody like that arriving that could reach icon status for the club, I think is huge. I think it goes on for many, many, many years if you're successful and you win. And that's what Ian Wright did. And here he is as a guy in his early 50s now. And he's still an icon for this club and one of the most popular people. And the reason why many millions support Arsenal. I'm not saying Zaha's going to be Ian Wright, but I can see if we are successful with that front three we can all name, who's to know his ceiling and how we would feel about him. I think there's something there we're underestimating. But I totally get it. People say, not worth it, Clive. We can get 2 players for that, and we need a centre-back. How can I argue with that? Because they're absolutely right. Factually, they are correct. But this is me just projecting forward and thinking, okay, are we really, really seeing what Zaha could be appropriately versus what the numbers are telling us? And sometimes, for me, football is just beyond the numbers.
I'm going to tell you something, and this may come as a shock to everybody. You're allowed to be a fan. You're not the CEO of the club. Yeah. You're not the technical director. You're not the coach. You are allowed to say, I'd have a hell of a lot of fun and connection to Zaha playing for Arsenal, so I want that. There is this sense that we can only want things for the club if they make fiscal sense and, sense in terms of a squad building methodology. And I admit that I like to get caught up in that, and I think it's interesting intellectually. But, you still got to watch the team. You still got to root for the players. There's nothing wrong getting excited about a player you love who you think would be fun coming to the club. Whether long-term it's in the best interest of the club is up to the people running it. If it proves to be a bad move that long-term isn't good for the club, that's not your fault, Clive. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Thank you, Elliot.
That's not your fault.
Feel better.
Yeah, like if they decide this is the player we need and they go spend the money on him and they bring him in and you have a hell of a lot of fun watching him, that's your job. If it winds up being a quagmire and we can't sell him and we overpaid and it doesn't work out, that's their fault. It's their fault. All right? Then I'll come back on this pod and say, haha, I told you so, but that's a different story. All right, real quick, on to the Madrid game. Look, we're going to put the refereeing aside. I think it was somewhat ridiculous. I mean, the red card probably is a red. You don't have to call it. There's rumors that Arsenal actually appealed to let Madrid go back to 11 men. The Socrates sending off was silly, but I do think maybe this preseason we're being reminded slightly that Socrates, the praise for him last season, maybe overstretched or outstretched the actual performances he put in. I think he might be more of a question mark for us than we think, but of course he's a central defender for Arsenal, so of course he is. Let's hit some of the high points. Paul, I thought we dominated the game early. It was really lovely to see. I thought Willock, again, a fun player to watch, but Aubameyang, loved his goal. There was just a lot to like early on. Were you impressed with the way we not only created chances but controlled the ball?
Yeah, and I think a bit like the Bayern game, there were echoes for a lot of these players against Madrid, right? You got Ozil, you got Aubameyang, who will have been in those discussions over the last few years about where he's going to play, and Madrid was one of those clubs he was rumoured to be up for. You got Lacazette rumoured at different times for Barca or whatever. So these guys all wanted to perform on the big stage, and they came out charging, and especially our two forwards were super lively in that first 10 minutes, and we got the penalty, and Lacazette put it away off two posts, I believe. But we started brightly, and then the stupid bloody red cards top and tail the first half, and it's bananas, is my view. If you can keep 11 players on the pitch, it's in everybody's bloody interest to do it. I absolutely nuts and absolutely amateurish to let it go that far. I think if it's dangerous play, then fuck them off. But if you can keep them on the pitch, keep them on the pitch for everybody's sake. I mean, when you look at it, so the lineup, I don't always remember it exactly as it was. So our lineup was, we had Martinez in goal. I thought he was pretty good, but probably could have done better on both their goals. Not that it was his fault, but he got his hand to one, etc. So might have done. In fact, he got his hand on the ball both times, and maybe there's a little bit of a growth opportunity for him generally. But made a couple of great saves as well. So I thought generally he looked the part, and his distribution was good. And we've got that over Czech last year. He may not have anything like the same experience, but he's switching between our two keepers, Leno and Martinez, is not such a big deal anymore because they can both distribute. I thought Jenks had fun, and that a lot of people still can't get over the fact that it's Jenks and they get all worked up about what he's doing on the pitch. But this is what preseason is about, as far as I'm concerned. There was a lot of fun and joy in his performance. But in particular, the midfield pairing with Willock was the thing that I really took away from that. And It's nice to get Zidane's compliment, but what's really nice is this is two big teams. Okay, they're not super competitive games. It's preseason, but this is two big teams who have targeted Willock once they found out how good he was, tried to take him down, take him out, stop him in his tracks. He's the guy they all get physical with, and I just think it's a brilliant sign that they're basically having to rugby tackle him in the midfield on two occasions. And you can argue the narrative of why the game turned, but one of the reasons the game turned in the second half is Willock went off at halftime, and I think that was lost in the wash as to why suddenly we went from being ahead. Yeah, we lost a man. But we also lost our performance in the second half and couldn't play out, and our two lines of four became narrower and narrower, and we put ourselves under tremendous pressure and couldn't get out. And then the kids came on at the end. That's basically my narrative for the game.
Clive, the thing that frustrated me a little bit is I would have preferred to see Xhaka come off and Willock stay on. And that's not an anti-Xhaka comment even. It's just I thought Willock was really driving us forward, but also you know who Xhaka is. You know what you have in Xhaka. Leave Willock on and see how he thrives in that situation. I wonder if maybe the boss was just thinking, I want us to win this game. I want us to stay competitive. I think it'd be good for us. I mean, for you, I was impressed with Willock. I would have liked to have seen him stay on. How do you feel about the way Xhaka performed in the game and maybe that decision?
You can see why though, mate. Xhaka's an inexperienced footballer. We don't all love him, but
certainly makes mistakes you don't expect from an experienced footballer.
Yeah. Okay, look, we're beyond that analysis, right? We can all see the mistakes. We can all see the mistakes, and so yeah, he's a holding player. We're down to 10 men. We have a player that could potentially be our captain, love him or hate him. We're not taking him off and leaving on a 19-year-old who is showing lots of bright play, but actually got pressed off the ball quite a bit in that first half. And actually, it's probably the best game he's had because it was versus the best opposition that put him under direct pressure. And he was a slightly more of a known quantity. And this is what he's going to have to deal with going forward because everyone's been watching him and not going to give him time. They're not going to let him run through them. They're not going to let him run from the midfield and arrive in the box as he feels like. He's going to get pushed, he's going to get bounced, he's going to get fouled, he's going to get pressed. And I thought he did really well. Even though he wasn't as spectacular as other games, I thought, yeah, you're actually showing you belong at the level. Because if you can live with this lot, he doesn't get much better than this, mate. So what you're doing, even though it's not perfect, it's an unbelievable thing for the coach to know just how far he can be stretched, just how far he can do it. Can he? Because now he can extrapolate that to Old Trafford away. Can I do it? Can I trust him there? And I think we're all coming around to the opinion that we can. It's coming, and that's the thing I walked away with from this game. Even though he was a little bit untidy on the ball on occasion, your eyes were still drawn to him by how he moved, how through the midfield, how he was brave, how he receives it, how he bursts out of his hole. I like players like that, so my eyes are always going to look at players like that, and my eyes don't find Xhaka so pleasing on the eye. But again, if I go back to my spreadsheet, he looks very pleasing on my spreadsheet. All right, that's a different side of football. On the spreadsheet,
it's what we'll call the Mustafi conundrum.
Yeah, exactly. And then we start talking final entry passes, man. I think I've got an unbelievable player on my hands. This is about the analysis of football statistically versus what you see, how you can make the two coexist and come up with a good opinion. And so
when you look at Eddie's counter attack in the second half when he gets one-on-one with the keeper, I mean that's Xhaka who's chipping that shot into his path perfectly. So
yeah,
he has his uses.
He has his uses, and it's a tough one, right? It's a tough one. We're transitioning again, shall we say? And
perpetually.
we have somebody that we generally starts the season slow, and then he builds into the season and normally ends it quite well. So we know we're going to get another player that seems to want to be here, wants to take responsibility, wants to be the leader of the dressing room, wants to make sure, for example, our players make sure they go over and applaud the fans in Europa League final. Things like that, things that are hidden behind the scenes, they're important to what a dressing room is. Not everybody, and this is coming from pace and power Clive here, but not everybody can be superb athlete. They have to bring something else to the team, a certain glue to the team, a certain leadership. Yes, I cannot get him shooting out of a gun against Brighton to go and kill somebody in the corner and potentially cost us 3 points. I can't forget that. And yes, we do need to develop away from him. But given the fact we just loaned a player in centre midfield, given the fact that we have no left back of any sort of dynamism that can play in the back four, given the fact that our best right back is back from a cruise ship, we don't know how long he's going to be around for, and same for our centre half, we got to ease them back. I just think there are bigger priorities than Granit Xhaka at the moment, but talk to me in a year's time and I think hopefully we'll be in a position to say, let's get him out of the way, because we've got so many players ahead. We can get Torreira back in there and we can go a different way. So that's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, and look, I mean, there are things that Xhaka does brilliantly. And nothing I'm saying about him is meant to invalidate those. And Paul referenced the ball that set Nketiah free. I mean, he's got that in his locker all day long. You give him 3 yards of space, deep in the midfield and a chance to look up, and he's going to spray some beautiful long balls. He is a wonderful distributor out to the wings. He is able to do that big switch across the pitch. Interestingly, I don't think he's great at the 5-yard pass. I think he leaves that short a lot. I think sometimes he makes decisions to go, laterally under pressure that can cause problems. And I think he defends with his arms and with his legs instead of moving his body. And there were 2 borderline penalties that maybe weren't penalties, but where you just saw the clumsiness of the way he defends because he doesn't move his body, he doesn't shuffle his feet.
Yeah, and with VAR, Elliot, that they could be issues,
scary.
couldn't they?
Yeah, well, it is.
It really is.
Because I think he puts the referee to a decision a lot. You know what I mean? He just puts the referee to a decision a lot. Same thing Mustafi does. Now, admittedly, Mustafi's a central defender, so it's a bigger problem. But I think in terms of watching Willock this summer and watching highlights of someone like Ceballos and watching Torreira with his little trickery last season, even Guendouzi with that little ability to push it ahead and drive past a guy, I just think the degree to which Xhaka is static and a little slow to move the ball short. He's great to move the ball long, spray it, switch it, fine. Those are the things that I think are potentially disruptive to our game that if he's not constantly and ever present in our midfield could be helpful. But we will see. As we sort of wrap up on this game, a couple of things. I mean, Aubameyang looks crazy sharp this summer. I mean, let's hope his season gets off to the kind of start that his summer is sort of previewing, I guess you would say. There's a word that I'm probably looking for. Yeah, but aside from him, I mean, the kids are the story. That's what we're looking at right now. We're trying to see what we have on our hands. When they came on, the entire front 3, I thought Nelson played pretty well, better than we've seen. Saka was excellent again. And Nketiah had 2 misses, but Paul, Nketiah had 2 misses in the same way Aubameyang's misses sometimes drive you nuts. You want a player that gets into 0.5 XG range. You know what I mean? You want that player. And I think Nketiah being in position to score 2 goals from 2 very good situations is really encouraging.
Yeah, I mean, great strikers unfortunately miss lots of great chances. Doesn't matter who they are, pretty much. I mean, Cavani's great skill is getting into those positions and missing his fair share. And it's like, if only he'd put those away. Well, he puts plenty away. And I think the exciting thing was Eddie got 2 great shouts there, and the header was not that easy. It was a pretty good header. I mean, it was Saka put the ball in, wasn't it? I mean, it was blasted in, and nearly took his head off and was just past the right post. So yeah, they were great positions. The 1-on-1, his touch got away from him, but I don't think that was the greatest pitch anybody's ever played on. And shit happens at speed, so. The timing of his run, blah, blah, blah. I thought he did great apart from finishing, which that was really all he was asked to do on the day. But you want him in those spots. I thought in particular the one that stood out, maybe because we've just got used to all the other young players playing well. Nelson, that was a big step up for me. I think he'll and while I've been critical of him, I think he'd feel the same way that he's been frustrated he hasn't got to show off so far this preseason. I think he'll come away from that game feeling pretty good about him. And I feel the same way. I think he really showed a bit of something now. It was a more counter-attacking game, which maybe suited him. He had some space. I don't know that I'd like to see him impress when the other team's sitting back and dug in. Show that he can be that wild card that can make a difference, that unpredictable player. But I thought he was really good in this right from the get-go. And if anybody, Sean, when we brought the kids on at the end in an attacking sense, maybe because he hasn't done it before for us this preseason, he for me really stood out. I'm like, yeah, I want to see more of this Nelson. So he'll come away from that feeling pretty darn good about himself, and he really helped us on the counter. And he set up that there was a great cross he put in. I don't know who came in for the cross. Was it Saka came in for that? Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's a brilliant cross. He put it in probably just a little earlier and a little better than Nketiah was prepared for. It came in hot, and he just couldn't quite make any contact because it would have been a goal with any solid contact.
Yeah. So yeah, I thought Nelson did great.
Well, so Clive, I mean, just real quick, two final issues on this game. One, there was a period in the second half where they scored their 2 goals, where we were under the cosh quite a bit. We were defending really deeply, and I think it was in a preseason that's been really encouraging, actually. It was a reminder, and we've had a few of these, to be fair, of the precariousness of our situation defensively. Now, to be fair, at the time, I mean, it's Monreal, Chambers, Jenkinson, Kolasinac. These are the defenders. I mean, I think Xhaka had dropped back into the defense. So how worrying was that period for you in terms of just being a reminder of the precariousness of the defensive situation?
Well, I'll tell you what, Lewis Ambrose sent a tweet out, a spreadsheet of our defensive options, and it was done in a way where it's like one shade for first team player, one shade for injury, one shade for player on the way out, one shade for player who we want to sell. And I think there was like one player left that was ready to play now, and it's like Socrates, and it just makes you, and he doesn't mind a red card, right? It really does scream at you. Well, it is becoming a real issue, right? We think that these players are going to carry us through the season. We are absolutely deluded. We really are. It's not about not liking players or being critical or moaning, because I'm not. I just know that Carl Jenkins is going to have one good game, and then within 10 minutes of the next game, he's going to let someone run off his shoulder. We're going to concede.
Well, that's more optimistic than me, by the way, because I can't see him having the one good game. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I should have said the word period rather than game, right? So, Mustafi, we all know that. You're just starting to believe in him. The next minute, he pushes Harry Kane in the box, and we can see the penalty in North London derby. Idiot, right? So, Koscielny wants out because he feels the world is against him. So there you go. Chambers, nice lad. You know the drill. Souffle, not happening. Rob Holding, a lot is on him, but he's had 9 months out, so he needs time. Bellerin, we all like, same as Rob Holding. Kolasinac is becoming a cult hero by the hour, right, and by the retweet. So we know he can play wing back. We know he knocks off at fullback. Monreal's 106. We have problems. We have problems here, and we have to address it. We really do. And if we can even address a couple of players back there, we have a chance to maybe wait, mix, match, and get through. And I know you don't like the back three, Elliot, but it's the best way to get through. Until we can get those more solid components in place, it's the best way. It's your players choose your system.
Can I just say why I disagree, just real quick? I haven't seen evidence that it makes us more defensively solid, but I have seen evidence that it makes us blunts our attack. So, like, absent the belief that it does improve our defense, I'd rather just see us attack better and control the ball more.
Well, it's interesting. There was an interview, I think it was pre the Real Madrid game, when Monreal and Emery were being interviewed, and they asked them a similar question about the back three. It may have been Andrew even asked the question. And I think it's interesting that Monreal says when we need to attack more, we take out a defender. I thought that's really interesting. That's how the players see it. That's how the manager sees it. So we may see it at home when we want to overload in higher areas. I think there's been occasions when he has been a little bit defensive in centre midfield or not offensive enough in fullback areas. Right, so but it's been those players. My point about Reece Nelson playing right wing back in a home game, 3 at the back, that works. You're taking out a defender and you're now putting in a winger that can defend. That works, and you are loading up the offensive areas. So we need to think about how we apply the back three, but with the players that we have, the system will choose itself in those moments, and we mustn't get fixated about the system because the players will define it and how they're playing, how secure they are, how they can accept responsibilities in their area of the pitch. And so that's what I see happening this season. So I'm telling you now, mate, the back three is here for another year until we can get a back four that absolutely all of us can pick without debate. We're gonna be mixing and matching tactically based on the opponent and where we're playing.
Yeah, and by the way, I mean, I think part of the problem, if you want to play the back three against Liverpool, Chelsea, City, United, Spurs, I mean, I prefer not to in those games. And in fact, I think we had our better performances against those teams in the back four. But, like, you could talk me into it. The problem is The reason we didn't finish top 4 is we didn't take enough points off the bottom 14, bottom 13. And to do that, you got to go get them. You got to go get goals. And so, and I realize it's the 51 goals we conceded that are the problem, but you have to play on the front foot against the small teams. So if we're a little more vulnerable,
you can do that in a 3. Don't think.
No, I know we can't.
The 3 stops you being
right.
It's about the makeup of your team.
It's
and your
that
point,
midfield too, Clive. When we played with Ramsey, I thought the back 3 looked more coherent in attack because his progressive running added a body into the final third. Without that, when it was Xhaka and Guendouzi, it didn't work.
Okay, no, it didn't. It didn't work as well. It worked differently. And so when Ramsey goes, that's great. So we think immediately we have another body around the penalty spot that can finish. Great. But when he's not in position in centre mid and we get broken on, we don't remember that. Do you see what I mean? We lose that from our minds, right? So the best formation last year for me was 4-diamond-2.
We played that at Spurs away, didn't we?
Yeah, I think that gives us a bit of solidity in midfield. So we protect our fullbacks with a 3 and a V. We have a floating 10, which we've got loads of, or a pressing 10, and we've got 2 4s who don't mind pinning back 4 defenders in between centre backs and fullbacks. That to me is our best formation. Right? But it doesn't mean I want to see it every single week, because as soon as you play every single week, you're going to get red, right? So I'm fine with it. I'm fine with the tactical changes. But I understand people's frustration with the back 3. So we need to get better at it and pick a different balance in centre mid or at wing back. And if we do that, I think it can be successful.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be argumentative. I personally don't care for it. I think this summer we've also seen the difference pretty starkly. Again, just preseason, but I think it was the Fiorentina game where we started with the back 3. It was pretty diabolical. A lot of passing between the center backs. It put so much pressure on the wing backs to receive the ball up against the touch line and distribute quickly and make runs. And when it works, that's how we got our first goal against Fiorentina. But there's long stretches of sterile possession with the back 3 cycling it between each other. So not my favorite, but I take your point. Paul, before we move on to just some final thoughts on the Q&A, do you have a thought on that in terms of sort of formation flexibility and whether you'd like to see the back 3 killed with fire the way I would?
I'm pretty much on the killed back 3 with fire. I think we need it as an option. I think there are games where it makes sense, but it needs to be. My preference is much more that it be Plan C without a Plan B. There is an argument that our squad still suits a back 3 in terms of the players we have. So we need to add some players. We need a Bellerin on both sides. Well, we have Ainsley Maitland-Niles doing a pretty good job on the right side. Maybe defensively he has a lot to learn, but they're working hard on him. They're working hard on Kolasinac defensively too. So maybe we'll get some improvement defensively from those 2 guys. You can argue that a lot of our squad fits a back 3 with wing backs better than it fits for the back, but I'm fully on board with we can't defend in either format, so let's get an extra attacker on the pitch. I think maybe some of our options may change. Maybe we'll look a little better with the back 3 when we try out Ceballos, because he will give us options from midfield to play more intricate build-up play. And I also think we've sucked playing out from the back, and one of the advantages of having that back 3 format is the ability to stretch the pitch and play out from the back, but we haven't really had the player. Maybe Ceballos will be an interesting player in that mix. We lose Ramsey for the back 3, where we look good, but we gain Ceballos. So we'll see. So there are some permutations, but Jesus, let's play interesting football. If we can't defend with either format, and we can't fix it, we also only need 2 centre backs if we're playing with a back 4, and we can barely scrape 2 decent ones together. I think the logic that, hey, let's put out three dodgy ones instead of 2 half decent ones. If we've got Holding and Socrates and they can stay fit for most games in the season, then I'd vote for 80+% of our games having a back 4, but we can switch to a back 3 when we need it. We should be playing 4-2-3-1 with we've got so many midfielders now. let's make sure we can stack up with fielders and attackers and just take it to them. And that makes our defense better. It should do. I mean, it never pans out that way. But we haven't really had an all-singing, all-dancing central midfielder who can hold possession, who can control the game, who can keep us up the field, who can keep us clever, and use the ball when we have it. We give it away too quickly. I mean, Xhaka's a great passer, but long balls get cut out too, and before you know it, you're defending again. So Ceballos, I hope, being press resistant, being able to dribble, beat a man, get the pass off and set us up the pitch. He's the guy who'll integrate to the front three and Ozil. It could all be different if we see a lot of Ceballos. If it's mostly the same players, it doesn't really change my opinion that we need to go be ballsy and play a more attacking structure. And Emery's kind of made noises that he'll lean more to a back four, and I hope that's what we do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Let's end with a little thought on the QA. I mean, look, preseason's been mostly encouraging. I mean, it's preseason, so it's stupid and it's pointless.
Really intense.
This is the interesting thing, too. I think people say throw out preseason, doesn't matter, it's a fitness exercise, don't pay attention to it. I slightly disagree. I think the ICC changed it a bit. You can't tell me that against Bayern, the players didn't care. That against Madrid, the players didn't care. When you play these prestige friendlies, again, they're still just friendlies, they're still training exercises, and those teams are a week behind us or 2 weeks behind us in preparation. So I'm not saying it's a competitive fixture, but it's definitely a level up than Singapore 11, or a local team, the Rapids game. These games had some spice to them. They had some energy and effort and challenge to them that I think give you a slightly better look at where you are in the process, and it was encouraging. So I think, why not be positive? We got nothing else to do other than be fucking miserable. So it is what it is. Speaking of being miserable, Clive, we covered the QA extensively with Tim. I just want to get your thoughts on the tone of it. There's a lot of anger that was expressed there, and I can identify with why a lot of that anger was expressed. But I think there is a fair question to be asked about the relationship between the fans and the clubs when you're in person with the chief executive and the director of football and the technical director who's a former player, and you have that direct access, and they're granting that to try to create a liaison with the fans. I mean, you don't have to be sycophantic or obsequious about it, but to what extent do you feel that the tone was problematic there? How do you feel about sort of the whole way that the Q&A was conducted in general?
Fandom is just a representation of society, of all of us. But I think, particularly in pre-season, what really becomes apparent is the global audience Arsenal have, particularly obviously with the pre-season tour being in America, and seeing some of the fan dedication out there has been really like an eye-opener for me and a reminder. But also, those guys support Arsenal in a different way, and then we have like the local fans, right? So the people that can get to the games, like myself, I'm going to the game on Sunday, and some of those people are well known. They are well known around the club, well known online, etc. And they have a fantastic opportunity to talk to the heads of the club. That I'm sure there are 30 million fans out there who would love that opportunity. So however they got there, they're there. And they've got this opportunity. And when that moment comes, there is a moment where you have to think. You have to think, I'm now in a position where I am slightly privileged and I have to be sensible by what I say. Don't walk in the room with your luggage of all your life's pain of supporting Arsenal and then give that out to everybody. Try to think about how your question can be really valuable and utilized in a way where the answer can give information and transparency to everybody that supports and loves the club. Right? It's not about how you as an individual feels. It's about how we feel. And I think sometimes that gets lost. And it becomes an emotion that flips to anger. And then I got to be honest with you, there was a podcast we could do, the 300th episode, and if it wasn't for the news that came out, we may have done a podcast talking about why we do podcasts, for example, why we invest this time. And one of the reasons why I do it, apart from the fact that I enjoy the company, is I try my best to be a better fan, to know more about the game, to be better. Every time I can possibly go and watch a game, I want to understand it more. I want to learn more about people's views. I want to engage with people. I want to be a better fan, right? Doesn't mean I don't moan. Doesn't mean I don't criticize. I want to be better. And I think we have to think about that as Arsenal fans. I don't think we're great. I don't think we're great as a collective. I think we can be better. Right? And everything in my power and everything that I have and all the understanding that I have, if I could help help people to understand football from my perspective, or help them see something that they may have already seen that brings to the forefront of their mind, that's why I do it. Right? And I think we need to be better as fans. Edu's been in the building 2 minutes and people are shouting at him. What are we doing? What are we doing? We would have said years ago, I sat on this podcast and said, I wish we had something like Bayern Munich or Ajax with lots of ex-players back in the club with senior roles. Well, guess what? We're moving that direction. The guy's sitting there 2 weeks into his job, honeymoon period, and people are shouting at him. This is not an idiot. This is someone that's won major trophies for the club. What are we doing? What we're doing is think about ourselves first and not the club. And I felt, and I don't care how this comes across, I felt embarrassed. And I know I'm not alone. And we have to be better. The club is trying. They're not perfect, but neither are you and neither am I. Right? So I think we really need to focus on this. We really do. And hopefully get some alignment with the club. They're going to walk out of that room thinking, what is the point? We have been ultra transparent, even down to sharing org charts, and that's used to slap us in the head. The first time we step out of line, we get slapped in the head. And I just think I prefer the engagement that we're having. I prefer the transparency. I don't want a one-man band where everything's wrapped into one individual and how he feels. I want a layer of people. I've always said this, some depth and some quality. I want to see better decisions. I'll tell you what I really want, Elliot. I want the football to come back because football takes everyone's priority over. I want the football to come back, meaningful football, because people are not thinking smart at the moment, and I find it disappointing.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is certainly a bit of it that reeks of entitlement. I think this has to happen in all walks of life, not just football, politics, everywhere. We have to be able to engage with people who upset us, disappoint us, disagree with us in a way that is respectful, in a way that is not hysterical. One thing that I think, whether you love some of the YouTube stuff that's out there, fans screaming into microphones or whatever, you can love whatever you love. Choose the content that's your favorite. And sometimes it's different types of content. But like for me, when I'm sitting in a room with someone or talking to someone over a microphone like this, I want to disagree with them when I do, but I want to be able to do it respectfully. And I guess the question I would ask is, what do you think you improve by shouting down Raul or Vinai or Edu? And it's not to say that I'm being the arbiter of appropriate behavior, because you know what? Everybody finds themselves in a situation where they've had a drink or they're in public, they get goaded on, and they behave in a way that maybe is regrettable. Emotion spills over. We're only human. We're only human. And I'm sure those people who are shouting do care, but there has to be an ability for us to engage with others who upset us or disagree with us or disappoint us in a way that is civil. And that can be more productive. Again, I don't want to come across as lecturing people who acted that way or being the arbiter of appropriate behavior and decorum, because that's not my place, and I certainly have let myself down at times. We all do it. But it is certainly worth asking, do you think that shouting them down advances anyone's cause, other than just a display of energy and emotion? I mean, Paul, I think that it is good that the club does this. I think it is helpful that the club does this. I think it's good that they do it locally, because while global supporters are very important, I think the club should cherish and value its local supporters and the people that are part of the community. Do you think that there is a level of respect and decorum that is owed, or is it fair for people to be emotional about a thing they love this much and have that emotion spill over?
Yeah, I think it's bloody great that the club does a Q&A. Very, very few clubs, as I understand it, do it. The people who talk the emotion comes through. You don't need to share your life story or bleed on the carpet. They bloody know. And they're going to get that in the they have a chat with everybody afterwards, so they know about the emotion. What we need is people who can articulate the fan issues intelligently and ask questions that move it's a dialogue with the club. It shouldn't be a shouting match. You don't need to vent your spleen. You don't need to, as I said, bleed on the carpet before them for them to understand what it means to the fans. Ask articulate questions that advance the dialogue with the club so that they understand. I mean, if all they go back with afterwards is, man, the fans are fucking having a meltdown. They don't understand what we're trying to do. There are real issues. They're not tapped into what those issues are. It creates a wall between the club and the fans, and they're not going to want much more of it. I mean, they may keep the Q&A going, but I think there were 3 or so. Well, there's a limited number of questions, and that gets wound down pretty quickly when it all gets ugly. If you want to have a bigger dialogue, have a better dialogue. The more eloquent, the more progressive the questions are that get to real issues. There was a great question around safe standing asked well, and it got a real answer. If you just put them on the defensive, you're not going to get very much because you get into a shouting match effectively. But they can't shout. I thought there was a really good line in the middle of it where somebody shouted up, "Oh, it's all just words." And I think it was Vinai said, "It's a Q&A. You know, it wasn't being smart. It's a Q&A. Words are all we have to give you, but it's part of a dialogue. And if you're asking intelligent questions, you know, they'll listen more and more. There's only so much they can do anyway. We know there are parameters, right? Self-sustaining model. Let's take the best case scenario. Cranky isn't going to put any money in. He's not going to take any money out. He wants a strong management team. It's entirely in his interests that the club be successful for obvious commercial reasons. He's not going to do anything weird and wonderful. He's not going to throw 300 million at it. But he's also entirely incented to put in place a good management team that has on and off the field success. Why don't we proceed on that basis? That everybody here is acting in good stead. If you think you can get Cranky out, good luck to you. You're a braver man than I to want to see that out, but it's going to be massive bloodshed. So working within the realities of what we've got, let's treat these people as honest actors trying to do the best job they can and communicate with them eloquently and in a sophisticated manner to have a proper discussion between fans and management to move the club forward. And they get it. You're all worked up about shit. So that's how I feel about it.
I think that's articulately put and passionately argued, and I don't have a lot to add to that. We are now, with all parts considered, hitting that magical 2-hour mark that I think everybody looks for in their podcast. I think if you can't have the entire Avengers Endgame movie play on mute while listening to our podcast, we haven't done our job. But don't ever let it be said that we over-prioritize Patreon, because this is 2 full hours of entirely free and hopefully somewhat enjoyable content. And then you can go to Patreon and hear the deep dive on Danny Ceballos we're going to do with Giant Gooner later today, or the one we did with Scott on Saliba and Ceballos and the Pepe rumors. So there's all that. I think we should leave it there, guys. Can we leave it there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I know we could go further.
Carry on.
Hey, look, Clive, you're going to the stadium this weekend, so that'll be fun, and we'll have lots to say about that, and hopefully we'll see Ceballos, which will be fun. And the season is drawing nigh, so. I mean,
yeah, I'm looking forward to Sunday. I'm going to my first ladies' game, which I can't wait. I'm going to get there early. I feel as though I know about it, but you know what? Let's go and see it. And so I'm looking forward to that. And yeah, I'm looking forward to a few drinks. And yeah, it should be fun.
I will be having a few of those tonight. I have the night off of being a grown-up and a parent tonight, so I will be doing the same. All right, well, here's what we're going to do. The first thing we're going to do is thank you for listening to this, and thank you for putting up with us. We do love you, and we appreciate all the feedback we get and everything. If you want to give us a 5-star review, it would be super appreciated. But if you don't, don't do that. Paul's on Twitter at Pause in My Pants. Thanks, Pause.
Woohoo!
Clive's on Twitter at ClivePAFC. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
My name's Elliot Smith. You can block me on Twitter, Yankee Gunner. Give us a 5-star review, as previously mentioned. Scott will be on with me doing a YouTube show next week, which I'm really excited about. And then we have a special guest YouTube show lined up that should be a hell of a lot of fun. Some really cool stuff lined up for the start of the new season, and a few guests between now and then to give us their take. So looking forward to all of that. Looking forward to, hopefully, an exciting end of the preseason and maybe even a positive start to the new season and maybe 1 or 2 more signings. Who knows? Asking too much? We'll find out. In either event, we are excited to get on with it, and we will talk to you after Arsenal 10, Lyon 0. Thanks, Clive.